So Libya's electoral board is calling for the postponement of this week's presidential election by at least a month to January 24. Libya's parliament on Thursday ordering the formation of a committee to create a roadmap for the period following December 24, when elections were meant to be held, and to submit their proposal within 1 week. So the Electoral Commission on Wednesday proposed pushing back the voting date by a month, confirming a delay that had been widely expected amid disputes over the rules, including the eligibility of several divisive candidates. Now, at stake is a peace process that had been seen as the best hope yet in years of bringing an end to the decade of chaos and violence that has engulfed Libya since a NATO-backed uprising ousted Gaddafi in 2011. Large numbers of Libyans had already registered for voting cards for the election in what politicians on all sides in Libya have said is a sign of strong popular desire for a vote. There is a growing concern, however, in the country that a more immediate risk is that a political crisis could add fuel to local disputes between rival armed groups that have mobilized in western Libya in recent weeks, leading to a new round of fighting inside the capital. Right, joining us now to talk a little bit more about this, Channel Africa producer and African Affairs analyst Izak Khomo, to share some insights with us on the developing story. A very good evening to you, Izak, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Let's first start with your preliminary thoughts around what is happening, the delay in elections, a council there making a good case for saying that some of these major fundamental issues need to be dealt with first before we can talk about candidates or elections. What are your thoughts?
Good evening to you, and thank you. Now, basically, my personal thought is that as they say that the elections have been delayed because they say that the election laws are very weak. And that is the truth. But then you find that Libya itself, the groups which are there, the interest groups are many. As you can see by the number of presidential candidates, they're over 70. And the thing has been rushed. And it was rushed through hoping that some influential corners would actually kidnap or actually sort of take over the whole election process and thereby get their candidates to the presidency. That is seen by the fact that they tried to isolate certain candidates under some spurious reasons of human rights. I'm talking about people like Islam Gaddafi or Haftar, and there's another third person. But basically, Libya is in a precarious situation whereby they actually, whatever takes place now, it has got to be legitimate so that they get a legitimate government in place. The issue of trying to sideline certain candidates over their past record, it actually defeats the legitimacy of the elections and also the legitimacy of the results. So basically, they've got to be very careful. That's what I can say.
So let's talk about which candidates specifically are you talking about. And I know there's the issue of citizenship, the origin of some of the candidates who are contesting, who may be seen as strong candidates. What is at stake, and in whose interest will it be to keep out some of the candidates?
Well, the two big candidates were actually sort of, but people went to court and actually sort of got them off the list. And there are other three candidates whose names have been got rid of. I do not know much about those three, but I could only talk about these two. I'm talking about Islam Gaddafi, that's the son of Gaddafi. Now, he basically is not popular, but he's got a sizable following. And so too is Khalifa Haftar. Khalifa Haftar, he's got a following, although he's not that popular. And they say that you can never win the elections. But the mere fact that these people are there and they've been blacklisted, that is very dangerous. it's dangerous because basically you are limiting the option to a few people who tend to follow a certain political line. And it should be remembered that the Libyan political scene, or the polity, it is fragmented with a lot of Islamic groups which are there. And basically, these are the ones who actually are vying for power. Now, to come and actually type off nationalistic or Republican figures, it is dangerous because that's a guarantee of the continuation of fighting and insurrections after the elections. That's a very dangerous thing.
So security concerns have been expressed about Libya at the moment, particularly in Tripoli, where there are reports that armed men have been seen. Now, talk to us about the balance of power here. You talk about Khalifa Haftar, and we understand that he had a meeting with two other leading presidential candidates, the ex-Libyan Interior Minister Fatih Bashaga, as well as the former Deputy Prime Minister Ahmed Maitik. What would you think happened behind the scenes, and how would it impact the current political landscape?
Well, I really do not know what they discussed, but I can only speculate from what has been said on the news. And they say also that the head of the parliament is an ally to Khalifa Haftar. But you mentioned something about the armed groups in Tripoli. Now, Khalifa Haftar has been a person who has been shown to be armed and to have presidential ambitions through using his army. But then people have not talked about the armed groups in Tripoli. The trouble is that Khalifa Haftar has got no presence in the western part of Libya. Now there you've got these many militias. And as I said, many of these militias are Islamic. And they're supported by the West. And we say that in the fight against Gaddafi, these were the groups which got armed, and they were actually formed by the Western countries, by the NATO countries. But now they've actually come up to be Islamists and to actually come and sabotage the whole process. I'm not saying that Khalifa Haftar is innocent, but that is the reality. So basically, it is a quagmire which the Libyans are in, but I mean to say that people who formed it have got to take responsibility. That is the West. They gave legitimacy to that group which was in the West, recognized by the United Nations and everybody else. People who actually talked against that were put down and they're shown to be detractors. But now they've got to face the reality. The problem is in the West, not in the East.
So then let's talk about that. You mentioned armed groups, and as you said, with armed groups becomes financial backing, the donors of this civil conflict. Is it just one, or are there many parties involved? And I say this because there's also been the development that of Abdul Basit Marwan, a senior military official who was dismissed very recently, and he has the backing of several powerful armed groups.
Well, that is the whole thing. I mean, you cannot go into details as who's backing who. But it just shows you that Libya is unstable. They've got this armed group and that armed group, and these people are vying for power. But the most important thing is this: that the Libyan conflict, it has been internationalized, because Khalifa Haftar is not innocent. Khalifa Haftar, while sitting there in Tobruk and Benghazi in the eastern part of the country, he has had a lot of support, and he has had a lot of support from Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Although right now they're talking about him having support of the Wagner mercenaries. But those Wagner mercenaries are nothing. They're not paid by Khalifa Haftar. Those guys have been paid by the UAE and Saudi Arabia. The man got over 200 million just to buy Toyota pickups, to buy the armament which goes on it, which are anti-aircraft guns. He got money to, he was given a whole Air Force. He's one of the few people who has got an Air Force. Yeah? And then he has also got the Egyptian support, logistic support. And then they gave him mercenaries. These were Sudanese, Janjaweed, who was sent to Yemen. And from Yemen, they were sent to Egypt. That is where the Sudanese military has got that connection to the UAE. Now that is Khalifa Haftar. Now Khalifa Haftar was going to take over Tripoli. There's no doubt about that. But then the people who stopped him, it was the Turks. The Turks came in and they actually made sure that you will not be able to take over that, and there was a stalemate. And that has led to this attempt to solve the whole problem politically. But then they have not solved the security thing on the ground.
So as you said earlier on, that it would destabilize in itself, preventing certain candidates from participating. As you mentioned, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi himself, including 25 other candidates, have been disqualified, or at least they want to disqualify them from taking part. He himself, they say, is because of being found guilty in absentia on war crimes. What would be the effect of this? Ignoring a very important component in terms of following for the Libyan people in the greater scheme of government unity, or a unity government?
You know, the Libyans, I don't know how to say. You're talking about a unity government and these other people have been disqualified. Now, the big issue is this, that the whole elections are taking place without proper election laws. Now, when you talk of proper election laws, those laws will actually sort of decide as to who is legitimate or who can take part in the elections or not. That is not there. But then now, in the interest of peace and in the interest of legitimacy of whoever wins, we have got to take in all people who are vying for the presidency. You should not start disqualifying people when you don't have a constitution which actually covers the elections, where you do not even have election laws which decide on who can stand and who cannot. So when you come and talk about people who have been charged or who have got cases in the ICC, yeah, so they cannot stand, that is very dangerous. That actually is defeating your own democratic process.
So the judiciary is being left to make the decision about the 98 candidates that have registered for this. Are they a credible arbiter? And I know it's a contradiction in terms, because there is an assumption of operating at a higher moral level if you are within the judiciary, but we know that in certain instances the judiciary can be captured. So could they be counted on to make fair rules when they decide over this, legitimacy and the rules that should govern the elections themselves?
You know, let me just say one thing. You're talking about rules and the judiciary. Islam Gaddafi, he was disqualified by a lower court. So too was Haftar. But at a higher court, they were allowed to run. But then I'll take you to a situation which is not related to Egypt, to Libya. I'll take a situation of conflict resolution. You know, in conflict resolutions, you know, you've got the all-inclusive, whatever they call it, these conflict resolutions, whereby you actually come and wipe out the old crimes and you start off with a new plate, yeah? And then you go forward. So now, Libya is in that position. They've actually got to wipe off the plate. South Africa went to that position. We cannot start talking about old crimes as what they're doing in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, they're talking about Mugabe's crimes in the western part of the country. Yet they wiped out crimes which were even worse during the war. Smith's crime, with his cellar scouts, which were vicious, and their killings. Everybody's forgotten about that. So let us not be selective. So basically, when it comes to justice, you've got to be very careful about in what situation you carry those justice. Now, for the sake of peace and development, you've got to actually clean the slate.
Just a final question. There are 2 female candidates that are also vying for candidacy here. Can we talk a little bit more about them and the significance of this?
Well, the significance of it is this, that the Islamists have not come up and questioned their candidates. Yeah, so basically that's a big step forward within Libya. You see, Libya, basically what Gaddafi did to Libya, many people do not understand. Gaddafi took Libya away from a very traditional point of view and tried to modernize that country. Yeah, he could not do it very well, but he was successful. Because, political analysts or political specialists will tell you is this, that the day you actually successfully produce a middle class, the time when that middle class vies for power, it means that you have been successful in doing what it is. Libya was nothing but just a feudal state. But now to the point that women are actually coming up, it's another positive step. And I think they're taking that action following the example of what happened in Tunisia. In Tunisia, the man in charge, the Said, has got a female prime minister. But again, the Tunisians are well advanced. Yeah, but that was the first sign of actually a woman in the Arab world being in that level of administration. So basically, the women getting there is very good. Said in Sudan, there are women who are vying for political power, and we should applaud those developments. It shows that the whole countries are becoming modernized, and democracy is actually spreading.
Thank you so much for speaking with us and sharing your insights. Izak Khomo speaking to us there about the situation in Libya, the impending elections. Of course, they've been postponed this month to next year, but just a month's delay then. He said the big problem there are the rules that will be governing not only the candidature of those running for power there, but the rules of engagement with regards to the poll itself.